When we start to combine plants in the landscape, we need to consider their elements of design. Not until you have all the bones of the landscape, including the hardscapes, the concept lines, the functional spaces, all figured out, do you finally start thinking about plants. Now you can take each planting bed or each viewpoint and fill it up with plant combinations. But just stuffing the beds with all the beautiful plants you can find is not necessarily good design. Instead, you have to give thoughtful consideration to how the plants are combined to create a great looking landscape. To create good plant combinations, you have to look at the characteristics of the plants, what we call the plant's elements of design. We have to give consideration to not just the color of the flowers on the plant, but its mature size, its texture, the form, and to combine the plants based on those characteristics so that they look well together and aren't just a jumbled up collection. There are 5 primary elements of design when it comes to plants. These are the visual characteristics of plants, and they include the type of plant that it is, the form, the size, which includes the height and width at maturity, the plant's texture, and the season in which it has significant interest. We have to pay attention to these characteristics when developing plant combinations because we have to have enough variety and interest, and with plants that changes throughout the year. We need to make sure the planting is attractive and interesting all year, but not too busy. It's easy to get hung up on flower color when choosing plants, but most plants are only in flower for a relatively short time period during the year, so it's important to consider the other visual characteristics of the plants as well. The secondary elements of design are actually more important because they relate to the health of the plant. The primary elements of design are the visual characteristics, while the secondary elements are the cultural characteristics. We aren't going to talk about these secondary elements right now because as master gardeners you've already learned a lot about them. While we proceed here and talk about the visual elements, you must always choose plants based on the secondary elements of design, the things the plants need to be healthy. These secondary elements include things like the hardiness, the soil conditions that they want to grow in, fertility, how much light they need, and if they're particularly susceptible to a disease or insect, or particularly resistant to a disease or insect. You can be the greatest designer on earth, but if you put plants where they don't have the right cultural conditions, they're not going to thrive, and it'll ruin the visual impact of your entire design. The first element of design, plant type, is pretty obvious. What type of plant is it? This could be a deciduous tree, deciduous shrub, evergreen tree or shrub, herbaceous perennial such as an ornamental grass, etc. As we choose plants, we should pay attention to this because we want to be sure that we have some variety in the types of plants that are there. Believe it or not, our brain will subconsciously notice if everything is the same type of plant. Each type of plant has different things to offer, so it's good to use some variety. For example, a bed full of perennials is fun and colorful, but having some woody deciduous shrubs in there will give it more of a sense of permanence and structure, especially during times of the year when the perennials are dormant. The second plant element of design is form. Form can be used to help direct the eye where you want it to go, to control the speed in which the eye goes, and it also provides interest and variety. Especially when we're talking about annuals and perennials, we have to consider both the foliage and the flowers. Notice the 2 pictures on the left where the individual flowers are flat. Your eye has a more side-to-side or horizontal movement. The pictures in the right have foliage that might move your eye horizontally, but the spiky inflorescences will slow the eye down and make it go a bit more up and down. You can create an accent by putting some spiky plants in with a mass of horizontal flowers or some flat blooms in with a mass of spiky flowers, for example. Remember that anytime you have something that's different from what's around it, it will stand out. Use that to create interest, but don't overdo it so that it's busy and breaks the flow and rhythm of the eye movement. The next plant element of design is the plant's size, and that means its full, mature, natural size. We've all seen landscape plantings that are terribly overgrown and crowded, and that not only looks bad, but it affects the health of the plants. It's important to plan for the mature size of the plant without pruning, because of course we want to minimize maintenance and only prune when it's necessary and good for the health of the plant. Both the height and spread of each plant has to be considered and planned for, and again, that's its mature size. Plants that are too big for their space not only look crowded, they can cause damage if they're too close to buildings. You should never let plants rub on siding or fences. For example, not only will that damage the siding, but it can rub wounds into the plant, which of course not only damages the plants outright, but can allow diseases and insects to get in. Texture is something that doesn't always get enough respect in landscape design. It is extremely important, especially considering that most of our perennial plants are only in bloom for a relatively short period of time. Texture refers to the visual coarseness or fineness of the plant, and we have to consider the foliage, the flowers, and also the overall structure and how that looks all year round, including in winter. If you don't believe how important texture is, why don't we like weeds in the lawn? Look at this dandelion surrounded by grass. They're pretty much the same color, maybe slightly different. They're the same height, but the dandelion stands out because of the different sized leaves, and that's texture. The fact that the dandelion is coarser in texture than the turf grass is makes it stand out. It's not the blooms of dandelions that we don't like, but it's also just the texture, the textural differences of the leaves. So visual texture is basically caused by light and dark. Usually with plants, it's caused by light and shadow caused by leaf size or branch structure. Larger leaves catch more light, but they also cast more dark shadows, so they're usually coarser in texture. Keep in mind that texture is relative to what's around it. So for example, an annual geranium, the pelargonium, will be coarse texture compared to a fine texture of a sweet alyssum annual, for example. But that same geranium might be fine texture in comparison to a cup plant. In this picture, the spirea with the more golden leaves is pretty much a medium texture, while the cranberry bush viburnum on the left is coarse texture, and the creeping juniper in the front is a fine texture. Notice how these different textures work together. The interface between the medium and coarse texture, or the medium and fine texture, grabs less attention and stands out less than the interface in the lower front between the coarse and fine textures. You need to pay attention to textures and use them to your advantage. If it's an area of transition between more important areas, you'll want to use a gradual sequence in texture, so fine next to medium next to coarse. If, however, it's an area you want to draw attention to, then use high contrast in texture, so coarse next to fine. That'll stand out more and catch the eye. Because texture is caused by light and dark, color is also a consideration. Variegated plants usually have a coarser texture because of the color contrast on the leaves. In the container planting on the left, for example, the plants all have about the same leaf size, and therefore they would cast about the same amount of light and dark, but the red and green leaf plant in the middle has a little bit coarser texture about it because of the color contrast within the leaf. Again, you have to consider the foliage, the overall structure, and the blooms when thinking about texture. The fine little dill bloom on the left is a super fine texture. Those little flowers cast very tiny shadows. The coleus on the right, because of the variegation, has a relatively coarse texture. You also have to consider hardscapes in the landscape because they have texture too. In this case, the brick edging is really quite coarse. Also, because fine texture recedes and coarse texture is stronger, you have to have more fine texture than coarse texture in order to be in balance. In this little planting, there's far more coarse texture between the brick edging and the moss roses in the middle than there is fine texture in the ring of sweet alyssum around the edge. The alyssum is pretty much lost and overpowered by all the coarse texture. So the rule of thumb is going back to the rule of thirds. The rule of thumb is that you should have about 2/3 of fine texture and 1/3 of coarse texture. In this picture you can really see the difference in texture. That tall cup plant has huge leaves which cast huge shadows. The coneflowers in the middle are a medium texture, and the grass on the right is a superfine texture. Again, don't use too much coarse texture because it will overpower. But it's important that you have variations in texture. If all of your plants are medium texture, they'll kind of muddle together and take away from each other, and your planting won't have any visual impact. You have to train your eye to see texture. In this planting, you can see how the coarser hosta overpower the finer textured ferns. This bed would look much better if there were more ferns and fewer hosta because the textures would be in better balance. Again, more fine texture, less coarse texture. Color often gets in the way of us seeing texture, so to help train yourself to see texture, try taking a digital picture of your garden and put it on your computer, and you can go in there and you can turn it to a black and white image. Because texture is created by light and dark, you'll be able to see the texture easier without having the color distract you. Here's a planting with some interesting colors, which is pretty cool, and obviously the point of this planting. But if you turn it to black and white, it has a whole different look. Notice how you can more easily see the textures of the plants once the color is out of the way. If you do this to a picture of your garden and all the plants kind of blend together, then you know you need to have more variety of texture and maybe plant form as well, because that often shows up more clearly in a black and white photo as well. The last plant element of design to consider is the season of interest. This means at what time during the year does this plant have notable interest? We don't care what the interest is at this point, just when it will be displaying that interest. Some plants have notable interest all year long, even though what creates that interest may change throughout the year. For example, a plant might have nice early spring colorful buds, followed by late spring flowers, then summer fruits and bright fall foliage color, and even interesting bark or branch structure during the winter. Once we start combining plants, we have to make sure that we have something of interest all year long, and be certain that the landscape doesn't look like bright fireworks in June and boring green the rest of the summer. Color is obviously an extremely important part of landscaping. We could spend hours and hours talking about color theory and color combinations, and it could get really complicated. But color in plants has its limitations because not all plants come in all flower colors. Also, the same plant might display a slightly different color from year to year because color can be affected by moisture or temperature. You can also get slightly different colors from site to site depending on soil conditions such as pH or nutrient levels, and how much sunlight a plant gets can also affect the color. When you choose a color scheme, you should look around at what's in the landscape, such as building colors, existing plants, that kind of thing. And then you should choose a color scheme that you like. One of the best ways to choose a color scheme is to steal and copy one. In other words, if you see a garden or landscape that really touches you and you really like the colors, go ahead and copy that color scheme. There are other places you can find color combinations that you like as well. They're not patented, you can steal them. For example, look at container plantings you see around, or bouquets of flowers that are for sale at the farmers markets. You can even use color schemes that you see on fabrics, such as clothing or draperies. If you really like a color combination, you can copy it. Again, these color combinations aren't patented or copyrighted. But also keep in mind that trying to use all of the colors of the rainbow can be challenging. Usually it's best to limit the number of colors in a specific area so that it doesn't get too gaudy or too busy. You can use a basic color wheel to help you combine colors as well. Keep in mind that the warm colors, yellow, orange, red, are stronger colors and they tend to advance towards you. Cool colors, on the other hand, such as blue and purple, tend to recede or appear further away than they actually are. For that reason, if you're combining both warm and cool colors, you have to use more cool colors than warm colors. So keep this in mind when you choose colors and place plants. Warm colors may be the best choice for planting that'll be viewed from a distance, because those warm colors advance towards you. If you're going to view cool colors from a distance, you need to have a bigger patch or it won't have much impact. If you want to draw attention to an area, use colors with a lot of contrast. Colors that are opposite from each other on the color wheel are called complementary colors, and they tend to look nice together, but they also have a lot of contrast, which creates a lot of energy. On the other hand, if it's an area that you want a more relaxed feeling, choose colors that are closer to each other on the color wheel. The closest you can get is monochromatic, which means that you pick a color and you combine different plants in different shades of that same color. Here's an annual bed with all cool colors, and you can see it has a relatively calm feeling about it. Notice the picture on the top. It's kind of busy because it has a lot of different colors in it. Sure, it's bright and cheery and colorful, but kind of busy. You don't really get any eye movement in there at all. But also notice how the warm colors overpower the cool colors, and how the cool colors, such as the violet, recede and are not as visible. The rule of thirds comes in here again. If you're combining both cool and warm colors in the same area, you should use about 2/3 cool colors and 1/3 warm colors. That'll keep the colors in a type of balance so that the cool colors don't get overpowered. White is neutral. It can add a lot of contrast or energy if it's used with dark colors, or it can be relaxing if used with light or pastel colors. It can also be used to transition between areas with warm colors and cool colors. When we're talking about flower color and deciding what colors to put where, we also have to consider the flower structure or shape. Sometimes, because a plant or flower has a really cool feature, it should be placed somewhere where it'll be viewed up close. The bleeding heart, for example, in the middle of this slide, needs to be appreciated for those amazing little heart-shaped blooms. The celosia on the left is such a unique flower that although it's a warm color and could be seen from a distance, it's a waste to not be seen up close where it can be touched and really appreciated for that unique shape. Other flowers are so bold that they work great in masses and have a lot of impact even if they're viewed from a distance. And of course, when we're talking about color, it's not just flowers but foliage that we should be considering. Another thing to keep in mind as you locate and choose plants is that in most cases, groups and masses create better eye movement and look better than if you have lots and lots of individual plants. It's not like a museum where you have individual pieces of art that are viewed individually. The plants in this picture are beautiful, but because there's only one of each one, they are each a focal point and your eye stops on each of them. You can certainly have individual plants here and there, but it would be much better if some of the smaller hosta in this picture, such as the one on the left, were divided up and that open mulch area was filled in to create some masses. Here are some examples of masses and drifts of plants within beds. Notice how your eye moves around more than it did in the last picture. And the masses and drifts don't have to be huge, but getting some kind of lines in there, some movement is really important. It looks much more naturalistic, especially for an informal landscape. The masses and drifts should also be intertwined a bit to look more natural. Your eye will find lines in the landscape, and that includes lines between masses of plants. Notice how unnatural this planting looks because the annuals are planted in blocks, and your eye will find those lines between the blocks. This bed, on the other hand, gives a much different, more natural feeling because there are not straight lines between the different species. Here's another picture where groups and masses are somewhat intertwined and you get some nice eye movement through the beds. Before you actually choose specific species of plants to plant, you should locate groups, masses, and individual plants on your scale drawing. Using a circle template, you would locate each plant and then decide which plants will combine well together and fit the situation. As you do this, remember to keep in the back of your mind all the principles of design that you learned about earlier. Balance, scale, variety, simplicity, emphasis or focal point, sequence, and repetition. To start the process of designing a specific bed area, consider if there's a backdrop already there or if you need to create one. A backdrop may be a building, a fence, existing trees or tall plants. It doesn't have to be super tall. A 6-foot group of plants can be an effective backdrop. What we don't want is for the eye to be able to look right over the bed and into the neighbors or off into the sky. A backdrop will stop the eye and keep it looking at the bed in front of it or the landscape in front of it. So if there's no existing backdrop, you should think of a way to create one. Because we'll be taking each area as a viewpoint or each major viewpoint and designing it, we need to have a place for the eye to start for each of these viewpoints. That could be a structure, a piece of garden art, a bird feeder, or it could be a plant that stands out from the rest and acts as a focal point. Place that focal point in the bed first, usually 1/3 of the way from the left or the right, not right in the middle. Then start with the biggest plants, usually near the back of the bed. This will give you a start and you can work your way from there. So here's an example of how to combine plants and design a bed from scratch. What we have here is a portion of a border planting with the front curved bed line formed by the shape of the turf grass area. That's the concept line that helps to tie the entire landscape together. So first we'll locate a focal point plant. This plant will be a focal point because there's only one of it. It also is the biggest plant that we'll have. We'll then assign the plant elements of design or plant characteristics to this plant. In this case, I'm going to say that this plant is 6 feet tall by 6 feet wide, has upright form, medium texture, and fall seasonal interest. Since we need to start someplace, you can pretty much pull those characteristics out of the air. Or you might already have a particular plant in mind that you want to showcase, so you might be listing the characteristics of that particular plant. Then the rest of the plants in this bed will have to coordinate with those characteristics. This will probably be the only plant that you can have a particular species in mind ahead of time. Next, we'll add a group of plants and assign characteristics to that group. In this case, I'm going to say it's an evergreen shrub, 4 feet tall by 4 feet wide, mounded form, coarse texture, and winter interest. I chose those characteristics because 4 feet tall is 2/3 the height of our first plant, so we're stepping down with gradual sequence. Evergreen because that'll add some variety. Mounded form, so it's different than the upright form of the first plant, but not too drastically different. Coarse texture next to the medium texture of the first plant, so again, some variety, but not too much. And then winter interest, so now I have 2 seasons covered. The next group of plants will again slightly intertwine with the previous group, and we'll say that it's a deciduous shrub, so some variety in front of the evergreen. It's also 2.5 feet tall, so about 2/3 the height of the shrub behind it. Medium texture, so a little different than the coarse textured evergreen. We'll give it creeping form, so we've gone from upright to mounded to creeping, so gradual sequence, and spring seasonal interest, covering another season. The next group we'll put in as an ornamental grass. This will be about 2/3 the height of the big shrub behind it. We'll give it upright form, medium texture, and fall interest, which is the same as the big shrub, but because they're such a different type of plant, that's not going to be a problem. Finally, we'll fill in the rest of the space with an herbaceous perennial. In this case, we'll have it shorter than what's behind it at 18 inches tall. It's going to be fine texture, which is a big contrast to the coarse texture of the evergreen behind it, so that'll make it stand out a little bit more. The form will be mounded, which, while similar to the evergreen behind it, it's different than the creeping form on the left and the upright form on the right. So variety, but a good transition. And we'll say that it has summer interest, and that interest will be red flowers. With these characteristics, you see that we have all the seasons covered. We also have some good variety of forms, textures, and sizes, so things won't all muddle together. There's some differences there. And we've drawn the circles to the full mature size of the plant, so draw things to scale and draw them to the full mature size of the plant so we won't end up with an overcrowded bed in a couple of years. Notice too how the groups of plants are slightly intertwined in a naturalistic way. No blocks of plants or straight lines between the groups that catch the eye. The final step is to find specific plants that match each of the characteristics that we just planned for. Let's take a look at that first shrub. If we do a search for all of the plants that match those characteristics, we'll come up with a list that includes those that are shown here. Before we pick one, we have to make sure that everything on the list is appropriate for the cultural conditions of the site. Those are the secondary elements of design that we talked about earlier. The light conditions, the hardiness, the soil and fertility conditions, disease and insect susceptibility. Make sure that you consider all of those when you make your choice of plant. No matter how great a plant will look, it has to be planted in the right conditions for it to thrive. So assuming all of the plants on this list are good matches for this site, you can pick any one of them that you like best. Different people like different things, and this is where you would pick what you like and your own personal taste comes into play. Then we'll do the same thing for the next group. For the evergreen shrub group, here's a list of at least 5 evergreens that match the primary or visual elements. As long as you're sure that the cultural requirements are correct, whichever one of these plants that you choose will work. It'll work well with that first plant because the characteristics work well. For the next group, these plants all match the characteristics. Again, you use your taste and preference in choosing them. For the ornamental grass, these are the ones that match. Again, choose whichever one you like best. And finally, for the last group, you can choose anyone from this list. We could give this little bed project to 25 different designers, and we could get 25 different combinations of these plants. But every one of these beds is going to look great because the plants are combined based on their characteristics. It's the combination of characteristics that make plants look good together. That's why sometimes if we just collect plants and fill up a bed, it doesn't look very good, even though we love all of those individual plants and they're great plants. But it's the forms and textures as well as the colors that if they aren't coordinated well, you won't have the best impact. It's also why sometimes we see a great combination of plants and we can just sense that they look good together. If you look at the individual plants' characteristics, you'll be able to analyze why they look so good together. When you know how to combine plants based on their characteristics, you can design beds that won't use just the same few plants as everybody else does. There are thousands of plants to choose from, hardy all the way into northern Wisconsin, so we really can have some great planting beds and plant combinations out there. So let's say that you choose a particular plant off this list, like the astilbe, and then it dies. So you replace it, and it dies again. So even though it's supposed to be suited to the growing conditions, for some reason it doesn't agree. It didn't read the book. All you have to do is choose another plant from this list and it's automatically going to look great with everything else because it's the characteristics that make it look great together. And then let's say that you move to Florida, for example, and somewhere where the hardiness zones are much warmer than Wisconsin. You could take the same design to a nursery there and choose plants that have the same characteristics that you identified, and you'll automatically have a great looking bed. So remember the principles of design when developing a landscape plan for your own backyard or for your master gardener volunteer projects. Create a landscape that's functional for what the users want to do in it, that's easily maintainable, that's environmentally friendly, cost effective both in the installation and the ongoing maintenance, and that looks great by incorporating balance, repetition, good scale, sequence, variety, simplicity, and has appropriate focal points, not too many of them, good eye movement through the use of groups and masses of plants and other lines. And then choose your plants and combine your plants based on the plant elements of design. Make sure that you have enough variety and interest in there, that you don't overcrowd the beds, and that you give some real consideration to your plant choices.